So as I mentioned, we're going to mainly be in Matthew chapter 2 this morning. Going to be going to some references outside of it. And we're going to focus on verses 13 through 15 of Matthew chapter 2. And so far in this chapter, the Magi, or the wise men, they finally located Jesus in Bethlehem. And contrary to the typical Christmas tradition, the Magi, very, very unlikely that they would have actually been present at the manger where Jesus was born. Very unlikely. Most likely they would have arrived, a couple years after Jesus had been born. And when they find him, they bow down and they worship this child. And they leave 3 gifts for him: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. The other part of the typical Christmas tradition is that there were 3 wise men, and according to very, very old church tradition, they've actually been given names. I can't remember what they are. I think one of them is Frank, maybe. I'm not sure though. But it's assumed, it doesn't say how many wise men were there. It's assumed that there was 3. Because we have 3 gifts, but most likely there probably would have been way more, and they would have most likely come with a massive caravan of people and camels and supplies, which they would have needed for this round trip to Bethlehem and back. I mean, Magi originally are from Persia, which isn't exactly next door to Bethlehem. And it's often preached sometimes that the 3 gifts are representative of who Jesus is. The gold is for royalty, the frankincense is for his divinity, and the myrrh, because it was often used as an embalming spice, it represents his suffering and death. The gifts would have definitely been given to Jesus out of recognition for him being a king, but beyond that, Matthew doesn't say anything about the meaning of the other gifts. In fact, frankincense and myrrh were also used as a gift given to royalty. So most likely all 3 of those things were given to Jesus in representation of him being king, because the Magi, when they went to Herod, they said, "Where is he who is king of the Jews? So we can worship him." And finally, they go to Herod, and I mentioned a little bit ago that they tell him, the king of the Jews, and Herod's like, "Oh, well, let me know where he is. I'd love to, bring Mary a casserole, as she's recovering from the birth. I'd love to, And I think they intended to, and then they're visited by an angel who says, "Don't talk to him, don't go back there, just get out of here." So they take some back roads out of Bethlehem. And then we get to verse 13. It says, "Now when they had departed, when the Magi departed, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, 'Rise, take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt, and remain there until I tell you, for Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him.'" So we already went over the reason for the angel telling them to flee to Egypt. Herod was about to just kill all the baby boys in Bethlehem. However, I think there is something else that we see in that verse. I really think this verse helps us to realize a very important aspect as we live our lives seeking to follow God. Now, the journey for them to stay in Egypt, that would have been nothing that seemed out of place at all. There was a very substantial Jewish population in Egypt at the time of Jesus' birth, especially in the city of Alexandria. Alexandria, Egypt, was just a lot of things going on there. There would have been synagogues there. There was even a Jewish temple in Egypt that was a replica of the temple in Jerusalem. So there was a massive population there. Would have been very normal for anybody to go to Egypt, whether they were needing something or not. And as I was looking at this passage, the Lord brought to my attention that as we look throughout Scripture, we see that God has had a very interesting relationship with the nation of Egypt. And the first mention of Egypt is in the book of Genesis. I think the very, very first mention is Noah's son Ham had a son named Egypt, and that's probably where the nation of Egypt came from. But in Genesis chapter 12, God comes to this guy named Abram and tells him that he is going to be the father of this entire nation that is going to end up blessing the whole world. He then tells Abram to pack up his things and just go wherever he leads him. And then we read this in Genesis 12, verse 10. It says, "Now there was a famine in the land. So Abram went down to Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was severe in the land." So something bad happens where Abram is, and we see that the place of safety, the place of fulfilling the need of no food is Egypt. And it was probably not something that Abram had to think about. As soon as he knew that there was a famine in the land, he probably immediately said, we're going to Egypt, because there's plenty of food there. We'll be taken care of. It's going to be great. Not only was Egypt a place of help and safety, but we see another aspect of it in Genesis chapter 13. In this chapter, Abram is traveling with his nephew Lot, and they are about to settle down in the land. And in verse 8 of Genesis 13, here's what Abram says. It says, "Abram said to Lot, 'Let there be no strife between you and me, and between your herdsmen and my herdsmen, for we're relatives. Is not the whole land before you? Separate yourself from me. If you take the left hand, I will go to the right. Or if you take the right hand, I will go to the left.' And Lot lifted up his eyes and saw that the Jordan Valley was well watered everywhere, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt in the direction of Zoar." This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So not only was Egypt a place of safety and solace, but it was a place that was very desirable. As soon as Lot saw something that just resembled Egypt, he took it. Egypt was so desirable that if anything even looked like Egypt, he wanted it. That's where you got to go. And as we seek to live for the Lord and follow him, we also have things that we will immediately depend on for safety and help, right? There's a famine. Abram's like, we got to go to Egypt. There are things that happen in our life, and we're like, I got to go here. I got to go there. We have things that we immediately will go to if we're in need, if something is wrong. But things don't always work the way that we might want them to with God. If we fast forward several years, Abram, who God renamed Abraham, is now dead, and his miracle child, Isaac, is continuing this plan of God for this nation. And in Genesis chapter 26, verse 1, it says, "Now there was a famine in the land besides the earlier famine that was in the days of Abraham. And Isaac went to Gerar to Abimelech, king of the Philistines." So now Isaac has to deal with a famine just like his father Abram did. And I wonder, I just was wondering if Isaac's father told him bedtime stories, Once upon a time, there was this great famine in the land, and your mother and I immediately went down to Egypt because everybody knew that Egypt was a safe place to go. I wonder if perhaps Isaac was thinking the same thing during his famine, right? Well, maybe I should go to Egypt, It's family tradition. My dad went to Egypt, so, I need to go there too. But then God says this to Isaac in verse 2. "And the Lord appeared to him and said, 'Do not go down to Egypt. Dwell in the land of which I shall tell you.'" Wait a minute. Don't go to Egypt. But Abram went to Egypt and God didn't have a problem with it. Egypt is off limits now? He can't go down there? That's not fair. Why did God say that? Well, the next verse 3, he says, "Sojourn in this land, and I will be with you and will bless you. For to you and to your offspring I will give all these lands, and I will establish the oath that I swore to Abraham your father." God tells Isaac not to go to Egypt. And perhaps, I wonder, maybe Isaac says, "But God, Dad went down to Egypt. That's where he got help." And God says, "I will be your help. I am going to take care of you. I am your safety. I'm your provision. Trust me Don't always trust in Egypt. So if we go back to Lot, Abram's nephew, Abram tells him, pick whatever land you want and I'll pick the other one. Makes you wonder how the story would have gone if Lot chose the other land and Abram was the one that went down to Sodom and Gomorrah. But all Lot has to do is see a part of the land that looks like Egypt. Then he immediately calls the real estate agent, says, hey, Larry, I want the keys to Egypt. And boom, he gets it. Then he probably goes to the first town hall meeting in Sodom and says, you guys do what on the weekends? Ah! I mean, I couldn't imagine. I mean, you imagine his shock. And Lot found himself right smack dab in the most wicked city on the planet. And remember, Lot gets a bad rap because he did do something stupid. He offered his daughters to some creeps, which I wouldn't recommend. But this is what we read about Lot in 2 Peter. Chapter 2, verse 7 and 8. Peter says, God rescued righteous Lot, greatly distressed by the sensual conduct of the wicked. For as that righteous man lived among them day after day, he was tormenting his righteous soul over the lawless deeds that he saw and heard. So we see it's very clear. Lot did not enjoy what happened there. He hated the things that went on. It was a torment to him because he knew that what these people were doing were evil. He knew it was wrong and he hated it. Bottom line though, Lot was so fixated on what he craved, living in a place like Egypt, that he didn't even have the wherewithal to see whether or not what he wanted was actually a good thing or not. He just wanted it. He didn't care whether it was good for him. He assumed it must be, right? Hey, if it's something I want, it has to be good for me, right? And like Lot, we all have things that we desire, and many times something can appear so desirable that we don't even stop to think, number one, is it worth it? And number two, is it actually going to be good for me if I get it? Well, many, many years after Lot, the nation of Israel still had this kind of problem involving, guess who? Egypt. The nation of Israel is being threatened by their enemies who are way bigger and way stronger than any of them. And the one thing they crave in these moments, the one thing they desire is just a great big army with soldiers and weapons and chariots and horses. And even though God tells them that all they need to do is trust in Him and they will have victory, they just can't help but go after what looks appealing to their own eyes. And who has just a big juicy army? Egypt. Irresistible. So God says in Isaiah chapter 30, verse 1, stubborn children, declares the Lord, who carry out a plan, but not mine, who make an alliance, but not of my spirit, that they may add sin to sin, who set to go down to Egypt without asking for my direction, to take refuge in the protection of Pharaoh, and to seek shelter in the shadow of Egypt. Israel was in such need of a good fighting force, and Egypt looked so good, they just couldn't resist. They couldn't resist asking for help. And just like Lot did not bother to see whether what he wanted was actually good for him, neither did the Israelites. And because of their disobedience, this is what God says in Isaiah 31, verse 1. Woe to those who go down to Egypt for help and rely on horses, who trust in chariots because they are many, and in horsemen because they're very strong, but they do not look to the Holy One of Israel or consult the Lord. And yet He is wise and brings disaster. He does not call back His words, but He will arise against the house of the evildoers and against the helpers of those who work iniquity. The Egyptians are men and not God. Their horses are flesh and not spirit. When the Lord stretches out His hand, the helper will stumble, and he who is helped will fall, and they will all perish together. But things are about to get very confusing here. God allows Abram to go to Egypt, but forbids Isaac from doing so. Many years later, God forbids Israel from seeking help from Egypt. But when we get to Matthew 2:13, God, through an angel, tells Joseph to go to Egypt. Make up your mind, God. Which is it? Go to Egypt or not go to Egypt? Well, what's going on? You tell me one thing here. You tell me another thing here. I'm trying to do this. You're telling me to do that. And all these things start happening and these bombs start dropping in my life and everything's chaos. And I don't know what's going on, God. And I need some answers. I'm just confused. I don't understand. I don't get any of this, God. What are you doing? And this is exactly what I think is happening in many of your lives right now. And you don't have any peace. You have anxiety, fear, depression, confusion. You don't have any rest. You have just exhaustion, even though Jesus promised to give you rest, right? Come to me, all ye who are weary, and I will give you rest. For my yoke is easy, my burden is light. And you're like, okay, Jesus, where's the light yoke? I'm not seeing it here. Why? I think it's because you may be spending all your time trying to make sense of everything going on. That what you end up doing is you are distracting yourself from receiving rest from God. And you know who is resting while you're doing that? Satan. He's resting while you're worried, when it should be you resting while he's worried. So what's the point of this sermon? Well, simply, trust God. Trust Him. Listen and trust Him. Stop trying to make sense of every single thing that happens. Why is it, and I'm including myself in this, why is it that we often replace the good commands of God, right? God commands us to be anxious for nothing. What a wonderful command. Have peace in me. He tells us that, but instead we replace those with things that He never told us to do, like trying to understand His infinite mind that is outside of time and space. How should we think of everything that is going on in our lives? How should we think of it? Jesus tells us exactly how we should be thinking of everything. Matthew 18, verses 1 through 4, says, "At that time the disciples came to Jesus, saying, 'Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?' And Jesus called to him a child, and He put him in the midst of all of them, and He said, 'Truly I say to you, unless you turn and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven.'" So what are you supposed to do with everything happening? You're supposed to become like a child again. What does that mean? Well, I mean, partly it means, children, especially back in this day, the only purpose people saw in them was a future heir to the inheritance, really. They didn't really do anything. They couldn't really accomplish anything. They were totally dependent on everybody else for everything, and that's part of it. But God brought, a situation to my mind that we've all had. If you're a parent, you've experienced it. If you're not a parent yet, you will experience it. I just remember we've all had those moments in our lives where things get stressful, things get tight, and you wonder, how are we going to buy groceries this week? Things really difficult. And I just remember times where, years ago, Tiffany and I would be driving in the car and we'd be having those conversations. And we'd be worried and we'd be trying to figure out this problem. Well, how are we going to get groceries this week? How are we going to do this and that? And I look in the back seat and I see this little girl in the back seat just resting and smiling. She's not that back there. I think they're talking about money. Oh man, what are we going to do? What if they can't give me food next week? What if I can't eat? I don't see that. I just saw a little girl just back there smiling. Why? Because she's not even aware that there's a problem. All she knows is, when I get hungry again, my mother and my father will have exactly what I need when I need it. And that's all that was on her mind. No worry, no fear. And so when you take all these problems on you in your life, these things you don't understand, you don't fathom, you're confused, and you're like, what's going on? I need to figure out this problem. And God is saying to you, that's my problem. I will figure that out. He says to you, you need to sit back and rest and understand that when you're hungry again, your Father will give you what you need when you need it. That's all that you need to know. That is what God is saying. It's not wrong to ask God questions. It's not wrong. Children do, right? Children, children. You get to that stage with children where they're like, "Why? Why? Why?" It's not wrong to ask questions. But there comes a time when you need to let go of needing to understand everything and just know that when you are hungry, your Heavenly Father is going to feed you. And the last part of this, I picture Joseph having this dream, and he wakes up and he's just like, okay, God, you're really putting me through it. Give me some time here. How are we going to get to Egypt? It's interesting. We see pictures you see paintings or videos or movies of Mary and Joseph traveling to Egypt and Mary sitting on a donkey. What makes you think they had a donkey? They probably didn't have anything. They didn't have money. Mary probably walked the whole way to Bethlehem. They had nothing. So Joseph is probably wringing his hands like, God, I don't have any money. I don't have anything that's of any value. How are we going to afford a trip to Egypt? And then Mary comes in and says, Joseph, yeah, Mary, what is it? Those weird guys that came here, they left us gold. And then Joseph says, gold? That'll get us to Egypt. I guess you know what you're doing, God, don't you? All of it, gold, frankincense, and myrrh, would have all been very valuable. That would have been more than enough to get them to Egypt, to probably have Joseph be able to build them a house, have everything they need. So not only does God know what he's doing, but he will provide what is needed for whatever he's telling you to do. And so, and it's sometimes it is easy to say, trust God. It's easy to say, it's easier said than done. But Jesus said it himself, you need to become like that little child again, just sitting in the back seat, not a care in the world, because you know that your Heavenly Father is going to take care of everything. And he is the one. It's not even correct to say that he's going to take care of the problems. There's no problems with God. He doesn't deal with problems. He knows everything that's going to happen, and he's already got the solution in his hand. And so I'm going to stop there this morning. And Donna, were you going to come up? I think she was going to come up and do one last song here. And so as she's doing that, as she's singing, if you need to become like a child again with God, if you need to get to that place where you just you can rest because you know that your Father is going to take care of you, then let God give you that, renew that trust in you. And you can come to the altar if you want, but just let Jesus give you that rest that you are resisting because you would rather worry than have it. So let's do that this morning.